One of this year's most remarkable publishing successes was Maus, A Survivor's Tale. It's a novel about the Holocaust, but it's written entirely in comic strip form by Art Spiegelman. Maus first appeared in serial form in the New York magazine Raw, an internationally acclaimed journal of avant-garde comics and graphics. Raw is a compilation of the finest comic strip art from all over the world, and it's co-edited by Françoise Mouly, Spiegelman's wife. Raw attempts to expand the very notion of what a comic strip can do. Its artists believe that comics are just as capable of telling enthralling stories as the novel or the cinema. Spiegelman and his wife have been publishing Raw for 8 years. Every edition has carried an episode of Maus. Art Spiegelman is one of the leaders of the generation of artists who have revolutionized the comic strip. Maus is his most ambitious and controversial work to date. His parents were Polish Jews who survived Auschwitz. Maus tells their story. It uses one of the most familiar devices of children's comics, presenting humans as animals. But in Spiegelman's novel, the mice are Jews and the cats are Nazis.
I know the publishers were rather frightened that the book would be seen as somehow a joke in very bad taste. I mean, if you describe the book in its short form, well, it's a comic book, and it's about the Holocaust, and it uses cats, mice, and pigs. What do you think? Makes it sound like all it is something in terrible taste. This isn't my metaphor. It's a really stupid metaphor. It's a dumb idea. But that's the point. The thing is, the book starts with an epigraph from Adolf Hitler. The Jews are undoubtedly a race, but they're not human, Adolf Hitler. The image of mice seemed appropriate. In Mein Kampf, you find references to Jews specifically as vermin. This is Hitler's metaphors, not mine. And it was my point to use these animals. Once I start with a mouse, yes, the logical animal for a mouse to worry about is a cat. In each instance, however, these are not really animals. They're humans wearing masks. They're masks that are meant to be removable in the sense that when you're reading the story, I think what happens is you do find these, I hope, the characters rather human.
Maus is a personal quest on Spiegelman's part. It not only tells the story of his parents' experience as Jews during the war, it's also an attempt to come to terms with his rather difficult relationship with them. The book is the result of 8 years' work, during which Spiegelman had to coax his father into remembering the past. The tale is told by a father mouse to his son, who's anxious to know the true story of his parents' lives. The story of Maus is derived from more than 30 hours of tape-recorded conversations that Spiegelman had with his father Vladek. Vladek Spiegelman died in 1982 and never saw the finished work.
I was dressed like a Gestapo. I organized myself boots, high boots, and slacks, such puffy slacks. You know, this kind that, yes, here it was narrow and here they were puffy. So because they had such a, I had mustache, and I also spoke always German when I came out. In the street I didn't speak any other language, only German. If I went to somebody else speak only German. Because not so well, but I knew German better than the people who lived there in Oberschlesien. Because this was together. Chopinice, Katowice was together with Sosnowiec. With a walking distance, you could go from one town to the other. Let's say, we were hidden, you know, in Chopinice.
The events in Maus take place amid a triangle of 3 towns in southwest Poland: Krakow, Katowice, and Sosnowiec. This is the site of the ghetto in Krakow. It's all that remains of the Jewish shtetl culture in Poland. Vladek and Anya Spiegelman lived in a Jewish community that numbered more than 30,000 before the war.
I wouldn't really want to make the case that my father survived because he was heroic, because he was somehow a very, very good man. My father had his positive attributes and negative attributes, and if I wanted cleaned up the act a bit and decided to like portray him a little bit more nobly, let's say, what one would come away with was, I see, if I act nobly, I too might survive a Holocaust. And that's really not the point at all.
Earlier this year, Spiegelman visited Poland to see for himself the places he'd only heard about from his father. These two men are among the very few Jewish survivors who still live in the area.
This was your house.
Here?
Here. Next to the court.
Wow.
Here. Oh, no, here by the house.
Here?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm now standing in my father's house, huh?
You are standing on your father's doorstep.
I guess so. But tell me, conjure up the house for me. Tell me
Hier
what it
auf
was.
diesen Ort ist man reingegangen in ein Haus. This was the entrance right here, Art. Ist man reingegangen in ein Haus.
Well, let's go in.
Ja.
In the winter of 1939, Poland withstood the German and Soviet onslaught for just a few weeks. With the division of spoils, Sosnowiec, where the Spiegelmans were living, came within the German Reich, as did Auschwitz. Jews were dragged out of their homes in so-called special operations and herded into ever more cramped ghettos. They were paraded through the streets, carrying humiliating placards. Maus has currently been translated into 10 languages. At first, Spiegelman objected to it being translated into German, but finally he relented, and it's to be published in Germany as well.
Nicht nur von hier, die Juden, nur von anderen Ländern auch. Von der Tschechoslowakei, von Ungarn, von Österreich. Von diesen alle Länder hat man hier gebracht, die Juden. Und das war ein Durchgangslager. Hier hat man gehalten 2, 3 Tage und weggeschickt. Am meisten nach Auschwitz.
Einige 100 Mann, jede Woche, jede Tag.
Jeden Tag.
Wir stehen schon zu lange da. Es ist ein großes Zusammenlauf.
Es sind zu viele Leute
Zu
hier.
viele Leute.
Ist das gefährlich, wenn so viele Leute hier sind?
Nein, aber
Podczas wojny widziałem.
Sie meinen, man soll hier keinen Auflauf machen?
nein, aber die Leute wissen nicht, was das ist. Sie sagen, dass wenn mit 40 Jahren zurück sollte man sich mit den Juden interessieren, nicht jetzt.
This is the house.
Das ist das Haus.
And where,
A gdzie dokonywano egzekucji?
Ist Ihnen jetzt ganz schwer festzustellen, ob es auf diesen Baum geworden ist oder an den anderen.
Was ist hier passiert?
Hat man 7 Juden aufgehangen. 7 Kaufleute.
They hanged 7 Jews?
Exekution, öffentliche Exekution. Man hat zusammengetrieben Juden und Christen auf diesem Platz. Man hat die zwangsweise Einwohner und die SS und die Gestapo. Und man hat hier 7 Juden.
They hang them on the tree.
Oh, they hang them on trees. It wasn't on a special news. This was the way I visualized what happened based on what I was
Tak on
told.
sobie wyobrażał to, jak wyglądała ta egzekucja.
I didn't know
Która,
that.
ta co tutaj była?
Ja.
Tak, to ja ją widziałam.
Tak, ale on
I never
ma
saw it.
pracę, on ma pracę z satyry, karykatury. Satyry ma. Bo mój ojciec opowiadał.
Die Juden mussten hier ganz schnell aus den Häusern heraus, um nach Schrodulla gebracht zu werden.
Ja, in einer Nacht.
In einer Nacht.
They took them from Schrodulla down the street 3 Maja.
Aha.
Teraz jest czerwonego
They took them to Schrodulla or from Schrodulla?
Ale tak brał pani
Ze Środuli czy do Środuli?
Ze Środuli, bo ze Środula jest tamtym oknem.
The Jews were required to assemble at this sports stadium, where they were to be separated out.
All the Jews of Sosnowiec were told to come here. There was about 30,000 Jews, and they were selected. They were chosen by whether they were healthy or sick, working, young, old. 20,000 were put here, 10,000 were put there. Those 10,000 were taken away and never came back.
And you drew that before you ever saw this stadium.
Yeah. I envisioned a somewhat more elaborate stadium when I first tried to picture it. But it's not that far off. The fortunate thing about drawing these crude drawings is that it works.
The young ones are playing football and they don't know.
Yeah, this could be another planet rather than the same piece of ground. It is another planet.
Spiegelman's father was fortunate enough to be sent to the right-hand side of the stadium, and he and his wife and young son were allowed to go. For days on end, the Spiegelmans and the other surviving Jews were crammed together in only 4 houses, thousands to each house. Many of them died. Many jumped from these balconies. At that time, the Spiegelmans had one child, a 3-year-old son called Rishu. Vladek managed to escape with his young family through an underground passage.
יום אכן ובחי די כל בית ישראל והגלה וזמן קרב ואמרי אמן.
Together, they made their way to the ghetto in Shrodula, a town which was razed to the ground later in the war. Fearing for the safety of their son, the Spiegelmans sent him to relations, hoping he'd have a better chance of survival with them. However, threatened with Auschwitz, his foster mother poisoned Rishu, herself, and her whole family. For the last time, the Spiegelmans managed to escape back to Sosnowiec, where they hoped to go underground.
This was the Jewish neighborhood. This was the main drag, you know, and the whole time what I'm trying to do is try to see the old push carts, the peddlers, try to find that lost world of my parents, you know. And for the most part, what's here is so present that it's hard for me to replace it with what I saw before. Maybe it's a kind of psychological protection. I don't know. But some of the people are the same. I look at the old people and I try to figure out which ones would have helped my parents, which ones would have like sold them down the river. I don't know. But I can't help but look into their faces and try to figure that out. And just try to figure that my father once, many times, walked up and down the street, bargaining, haggling, making deals left and right, both before the war and during the war.
Do you think they see you as a Jew?
I'm sure they see me as a Jew. As my father said, they can smell them.
And you think that's why everybody is staring at you as well as...
Well, no, I think it has to do with the crew being possessed away.
Finally, a smuggler offered to get them safely to Hungary, but then betrayed them to the Gestapo.
Hier ist das Gefängnis von hinten aus gesehen, in dem die Gefangenen gehalten wurden. Die kleinen Fenster waren immer vergittert, mit Stacheldraht versehen. Und wer hier hereinkam, kam selten heraus. Hier war ein Durchgangslager gewesen für Kriminelle und für politische Gefangene.
So this is actually the last stop of your parents?
This was the end of the line. This was when they got caught trying to escape Poland and got sent to Auschwitz. This was where they were sent before they were sent to Auschwitz.
The Spiegelmans were sent from Bielsko to Auschwitz, not as ordinary Jews, but as criminals. Criminals were considered the better species of the two. This was another small advantage which helped them to survive.
Proszę bardzo, jeszcze 3 bilety drugiej klasy, Sosnowiec, Oświęcim i z powrotem.
Guilty because you didn't take that trip instead of your father?
In a sense, yeah, in a sense of like never being able to understand what it is that he went through. I feel I have an obligation to try to understand that now. So I suppose that just makes me go to these rather extreme lengths of having to recapitulate things. In a way, it's safer to do it the way I'm doing it, which means working on a book about it, rather than some more dramatic way of trying to recapitulate concentration camp life.
Does it help you detach yourself from it?
I hope so. I think it's a way of looking something in the eye as a way of making it go away, at least a little bit, rather than letting it always be a pressure from behind.
Why did you want Françoise and the baby to come along?
Well, it would be too hard to tell Françoise what happened any other way, and we're too close for us to do things separately in that sense. It would be too big a part of my life that would be she'd be cut off from, and we need to have that. You know, there's something for me that feels like I like the idea of being able to spit in somebody's face and being able to like say, see, here we are, and we've got a baby and things are still, life goes on in spite of everything those bastards did. That's something, you know? Like to be able to go there and walk away from it. That's something.
Today, Auschwitz has become one of the busiest tourist attractions in Poland.
Planowy odjazd pociągu godzina 14:40.
The land between the station and the camp gate belongs to a dozen local farmers whose families have lived here for generations. Permission to cross has to be negotiated.
Niech więcej nie jest i fertyk. Jeżeli by dali tydzień czasu, by każdy wiedział i by obczyścił. Co to będzie miało? No to jest 4 coś takiego. No to oni tutaj są wszyscy też, tylko że... 3 osoby odpadają. No.
3 osoby odpadają.
3 osoby, to jest Paszek, ale Paszek odpada.
3 osoby odpadają.
Tutaj we wsi, że to są turyści. Wagony szły, filmowali i mówią filmy. Gdzie filmują? Mają kamery, prawda?
A już przepłaci cały metraż.
2000 każdy.
Nikt nie ulguje.
To musi być fachowiec. Musi być z odcinka drogowego.
Panie, co pan gada, żeby te chwasty powyrywać, fachowiec musi być?
Proszę pana, jeżeli facą tak prawa kierunka.
A to płacę panią 3600.
This is the entrance to Auschwitz-Birkenau, an adjunct of the main camp, where Art Spiegelman's mother spent 8 months. His father was in the main camp. The Jews were divided up into different categories of prisoner on this selection site. At that time, the total population of the camp was 155,000. As Birkenau has yet to be turned into a museum, this first view from the train remains unchanged. When Vladek Spiegelman arrived, he was told, "When you leave here, you leave through the chimney." Spiegelman used his father's concentration camp number on the cover of the projected second volume of Maus, Mauschwitz. Vladek Spiegelman belonged to the Special Commando Squad, the Sonderkommando, whose final task was to blow up the crematoria and their ovens before the Russians moved in.
This is one of the 4 crematoria and gas chambers. People came down those stairs over there, undressed, left their clothes over there, and were taken to a shower, to take a shower. Over here, this was the supposed shower of the gas chambers, where people were killed from there, their bodies were taken over here. These were the crematoria where they burned the bodies. Went up in smoke.
There are some people that pretend that Auschwitz never took place and no one ever was gassed there.
It's so hard to believe it could be done. Maybe it's the only explanation other than absolute evil.
The first gas chamber, Auschwitz No. 1, is still intact. Because it was smaller, it was used more as a storehouse. In the crematorium adjacent to it, only the walls have been rebuilt. The furnaces remain as they were. When the camp was liberated in January 1945, it was still being enlarged.
Why did you want to come here and throw this?
I needed to come here because I need to understand, and this is what it was like there then. It's what it was. The women's barracks is where my mother was.
This is women's camp B1A and B, which had 55 barracks, all of the same size. Each of these sections housed 10 to 12 women. Not only was there an orchestra in Auschwitz, but the inmates were required to entertain the Nazis with camp songs.
Im Lager Auschwitz war ich zwar, Hollaria, Hollario, so auf einen Monat, Tag und Jahr. Hollaria, hollaria, doch denk ich froh, Gemut und gern an meine Lieben in der Fern. Doch denk ich froh, Gemut und gern an meine Lieben in der Fern. An jeden Morgen in der Früh, hollaria, hollaria, beginnt des Tages Last und Mühe. Hollaria, hollaria, ob Arbeitsdienst, ob Sport uns zwingt, doch stets ein frohes Lied erklingt. Doch auch für uns kommt mal die Zeit, hollaria, hollaria, wo aus der Schutzhaft wir befreit. Hollaria, hollaria, dann werden froh wir heimwärts ziehen, ganz gleich, ob's schneit, ob's Rosen blühen, dann werden froh wir heimwärts ziehen, ganz gleich, ob's schneit, ob's Rosen blühen.
It's gigantic in its own horrifying. Right, it's just one. And right there is another one with the same. It's just more of this.
In 44 is it 40,000 this part of the cabin.
40,000? The numbers become meaningless. I don't understand what it means. I just know that this was a sea of people.
When you say that people have to actually hear.
Six months after the war ended, Spiegelman's parents were reunited. It was a reunion that happened against all the odds. Before they were liberated, his mother was about to be transported to Belsen and his father to Gross Rosen, a smaller camp on the way to Dachau where hardly anyone survived. After a long search, they found each other again here in Sosnowiec, in a Jewish rooming house, which is now a club for the blind.
Did they actually know that they were alive about each other?
No, and this is the first place they met. This is when my father found out my mother really had survived the war.
Can you imagine what happened at that moment?
Well, I was told that everybody who was here burst into tears. Out of two large families, that's all that was left.
Ich wollte erklären, dass meine Augen sind ganz kaputt. Ich bin Invaliden erster Gruppe und kann nicht gut sehen. Tu jest pomieszczenie kuchenne dawnego lokalu. Tak, to wszystko, tak?
Having managed to survive, the couple went to Stockholm, where in 1948 their second son, Art, was born.
Actually, if your father hadn't made it, you wouldn't be here today.
that's for sure. I think about that a lot while working on this kind of project. It sort of means that I somehow have to justify my life, you know?
Spiegelman was brought up in New York. In his teens and early 20s, like many of his generation, he was estranged from his parents. He had a breakdown and spent some time in an asylum. And in 1968, his mother, finding she could no longer communicate with either her husband or her son, committed suicide. Spiegelman tried to exorcise the experience through his work.
So this trip to Poland was, I'm hoping it was useful. I haven't even had a chance to sort through what happened for myself yet. The experience of it was, of course, colored by the fact that there was always a film being made, so it always kept me half a step away from what I was seeing. I haven't had time for it all to flood back in, even since I've been back. Also, what was really bizarre was walking around with these characters, you know, like being filmed there, being objectified.
Didn't you also enjoy it?
It's a kind of pleasure, but rather minimal. On the other hand, it's not nearly as painful as what I'll eventually have to confront. We went to the ruins, and that's really what's there, is the ruins of what was there before, of the barracks my mother had been in, and also to the site of the crematory and gas chambers. I brought you a gift. This is a brick from one of the crematoria. It's a tombstone of a kind to bring back. And somehow that was really something for me. You know, like walking through, being there was moving. It's very dangerous to do a lot of research into this Holocaust stuff because most Holocaust scholars end up killing themselves. I don't remember where I heard that or whether it holds any water or not, but it's an incredibly dark thing to have to like delve into day in, day out, and rather. There seems to be something insane about achieving some kind of celebrity for working in that area. You know, like that. There's no way that feels deserved or relishable. You know. Beer, everyone?
Yeah.
Since 1980, Art and Francois Spiegelman have been working painstakingly on their graphic magazine, Raw. Original editions are now collector's items and change hands for hundreds of dollars. But the magazine appears irregularly, as it takes Spiegelman more and more time to produce a new chapter of Maus.
Art, why do you draw Jews as mice in your cartoon?
Well, it's not my metaphor, it's Hitler's. He was the one that decided that there was such a thing as subhuman humans, as vermin to be exterminated. And, well, in any case, they're not mice, they're masks for humans in my comic.
Why Germans as cats?
Well, when you have mice, you have cats. I've seen enough animated cartoons to know that already.
Most everyone loves cats.
Yeah, but I don't think they can love the cats and mouse.
Françoise, is it always as easy as it seems to be with Art Spiegelman?
Oh, what's interesting is that it changes all the time, and there's times where it's pretty rough, and there are times where it's really wonderful.
At one time, Art, you had a mental breakdown. How much time did you actually spend in a nut house?
Well, I was in college for 2 years, and I did postgraduate work in a mental hospital for about 6 weeks.
What did it actually feel like to be nuts?
Crazy, man.
Why did you take drugs?
Well, I took mostly psychedelic drugs, you know, and I found them as they were advertised. They were consciousness expanders. They made one aware of things one hadn't been aware of before. And for me, that was a thrilling search for knowledge.
Are you keeping him out of trouble and out of breakdowns?
That would be too hard a job. No, only Art can do that.
Are you doing it yourself?
As best I can, from day to day, of course.
Do you feel that one can reconstruct your parents' Auschwitz in a comic strip or in anything for that matter?
No, in a sense, any form of shaping about Auschwitz, any kind of telling, involves a kind of lying. And then, as a result, the only choice one has is either one remains silent, and that's one choice, or one speaks. And if one speaks, it involves an intelligent kind of lying. And that kind of lying hopefully can at least point towards some truth.
Do you think that the warning that your book expresses can contribute to save humanity?
You know, in a way, all I'm trying to do is save myself.
Just
His 8 years working on Maus have turned Art Spiegelman into a national celebrity. As a result of the publishing success, Maus is now in its 9th printing. 2 more books by raw artists are to be published in the spring. There's also the possibility of an animated cartoon. But Spiegelman's main project is his next Maus book. It's to be called From Auschwitz to the Catskills and Beyond. And he has no idea when he'll finish it.